Most people have been taught the wrong lesson about silence. They were raised to believe that staying quiet means you are afraid, that refusing to argue means you have no good argument, that walking away from a fight means you simply did not have enough to say. And because this belief runs so deep in human psychology, most people do exactly the same thing every single time someone challenges them. They jump in, they fire back. They defend themselves loudly and quickly, convinced that speed and volume equals strength. But here is what nobody tells you. That instinct, that almost automatic urge to react, is one of the most dangerous traps in all of human social interaction. The second you let your emotions drive your response, you hand over something far more valuable than the argument. You hand over control. You hand over the one thing that truly determines who holds the power in any interaction. Because here is what most people completely miss. When someone provokes you, their words are not the actual weapon. The words are simply the trigger. The real goal, the real target, is your emotional reaction. They are not fishing for the truth. They are not genuinely interested in a debate. They are fishing for proof. Proof that they can reach inside your mind and move something around in there. Proof that you are accessible. Proof that they hold influence over your internal world. The moment you bite, the moment you react with frustration, defensiveness, or anger, you hand them exactly what they came for. Now you are no longer watching the interaction from a stable place. You are deep inside it, explaining yourself, justifying yourself, responding to every move they make. And while you are doing all of that, they are watching one thing very carefully: how completely they just took control of your emotional state. The person who reacts first almost always loses, not because their argument was weaker, but because reaction transfers authority. It announces loudly that this person has a direct line to your internal world. Centuries ago, students of power and social strategy began to notice something important about how influence actually works. True authority in human dynamics has never been about who speaks the loudest or argues the hardest. It has always been about who controls attention and who controls their own emotional response under pressure. And sometimes the most powerful position available to you is not confrontation at all. It is deliberate, strategic silence. When you make the choice to remain still, when you pull back your reaction and offer nothing in return, something remarkable starts to happen. The person who came to provoke you slowly begins to unravel. Not because you defeated them, not because you out-argued them, but because you refused to enter the game they built specifically for you. And without your participation, that game collapses entirely. In this video, we are going to explore 7 deep psychological principles that explain exactly why ignoring someone strategically can completely flip the power balance in any interaction. You will understand how silence frustrates manipulators, destabilizes provocateurs, and quietly returns authority to where it belongs. Because the most powerful person in any room is rarely the loudest voice in it. It is almost always the one who cannot be emotionally baited into the fight. Before we dive in, drop this affirmation in the comments right now. Silence is my power. Let's begin. Every human being carries a deep psychological need to know that they exist meaningfully in other people's minds. This need runs underneath almost every social interaction, even the aggressive ones, maybe especially the aggressive ones. When someone throws a provocative comment your way, when they insult you, challenge you, or try to undermine your confidence, there is always an invisible expectation attached to those words. They are waiting for a reflection. When you fire back with anger, they see their influence mirrored perfectly. When you scramble to defend yourself, they see confirmation that their words carry weight. When you argue point for point, they see evidence that they have entered your mental space and rearranged things inside it. Your reaction acts as a mirror. It proves their impact. This is why so many provocateurs spend more time watching your face than actually listening to what you say back. They are not evaluating your argument. They are measuring how deeply they got inside you. Now imagine what happens when you simply refuse to provide that reflection. The moment you stay silent, the moment you offer no emotional response at all, the mirror disappears. The person who expected to see their influence bouncing back at them sees nothing. Blank space. Absence. And the human mind does not handle absence well, especially when it expected impact. The brain immediately starts generating questions. Was that intentional? Did they even hear what I said? Have I completely misjudged this person? Do I actually have less influence here than I assumed? That flood of uncertainty begins to replace the confidence they walked in with. What was a moment earlier, a clear sense of control, quickly starts crumbling because the feedback they depended on never arrived. This is where a deep psychological fracture forms. People rely on social feedback the way sailors rely on instruments. Without those readings, they lose their sense of position. They lose their sense of whether they are succeeding or failing. A critic needs to see your defense to know their criticism landed. A provocateur needs your irritation to confirm their power. Take away those signals, and their internal navigation system begins spinning. Picture speaking into a room where every word you produce disappears into total silence. No echo, no response. No confirmation that sound even traveled. First, it feels strange. Then it feels deeply unsettling. That is precisely the experience your strategic silence creates inside the mind of someone who expected a reaction. The absence itself forces them to face an idea they never prepared for. That perhaps they do not occupy the space in your mind they assume they did. And that single realization, that possibility of psychological irrelevance, is more destabilizing to most people than any direct confrontation ever could be. Confrontation at least acknowledges their presence. Silence quietly dissolves it. Experienced strategists understand that attention is a form of currency. Every response you give is an investment. Every defense confirms the other person successfully captured your focus. Silence withdraws that investment completely and leaves the provocateur speaking into a psychological void. And voids do something interesting to the human mind. They amplify doubt. They fill with uncertainty. And uncertainty, as we will see throughout this video, is one of the most powerful forces in any social dynamic. Drop this affirmation in the comments. I choose where my attention goes. Beneath the surface of every human interaction, the brain is running a constant background process. It is quietly asking one question over and over. Who holds the stronger position here? This happens automatically. It does not matter whether you are in a boardroom or a casual conversation, whether you are in a confrontation or a simple exchange. The brain is always scanning. It measures emotional stability, it reads confidence, it watches how people respond to pressure. And based on all of those signals, it constructs a silent hierarchy. A ranking of who appears to hold more psychological authority in this particular moment. The dangerous part is that most people broadcast their position without ever realizing it. When someone provokes them and they rush to respond, they signal that the other person's words carry significance. When they grow defensive, they reveal emotional investment. When they repeat explanations over and over, they expose that the accusation has lodged itself deep enough in their mind to require repeated correction. These responses feel completely normal. But psychologically, they are delivering critical information. They are telling the other person, your provocation worked. You have access to my emotional world. But something entirely different happens when you respond with composed indifference or complete silence. Rather than confirming the hierarchy, you dissolve it. The other person cannot determine why you chose not to engage. Was it because you felt overwhelmed and had no answer? Or was it because the interaction simply was not worth your time and attention? That single unanswerable question creates what we might call status ambiguity. The social hierarchy of the moment becomes genuinely unclear. And human beings struggle significantly with unclear hierarchies because the brain craves social stability. When it cannot determine where someone stands in relation to itself, it does not simply wait calmly. It begins working overtime to restore clarity. This is why people often escalate their behavior when they are met with silence. They push harder, they sharpen their tone, they try humor or public pressure or louder accusations. Every one of these escalations is an unconscious attempt to force a reaction that will finally tell them where they stand. But each attempt that fails deepens the ambiguity further. The provocateur expected a fast emotional signal that would lock in their dominance. Instead, they keep hitting composure and distance, and that composure begins to quietly rewrite the story of the interaction. Your silence introduces a possibility that cannot be ignored. Maybe you are not holding back out of weakness. Maybe you are simply operating at a level where this interaction does not register as a threat. That possibility spreads. It changes how the moment feels to observers. When people see one person pushing desperately for a response while the other person remains completely unmoved, they begin drawing their own conclusions about who is actually holding the stronger hand. The person seeking acknowledgement starts losing credibility. The silent individual starts accumulating it. And none of this required a single word, a single argument, or a single direct challenge. Status ambiguity is powerful precisely because it leaves the question open. And when the question stays open, the other person starts answering it for themselves through their own escalating behavior. The more they push, the more their need becomes visible. The more their need becomes visible, the lower their position appears. Drop this in the comments. My silence speaks for itself. Most people associate strength with visible force. They believe real authority shows up as raised voices, sharp arguments, and relentless pressure. And because confrontation feels active, it also feels powerful. But confrontation creates something very predictable. It creates a visible arena. The moment you start arguing, both sides understand exactly what is happening. There are attacks and counterattacks, accusations and rebuttals, escalations and responses. Every move invites the next move. And once you're inside that structure, you are not controlling the environment anymore. You are just another participant in it. Strategic silence introduces something that confrontation never can. Instead of a visible resistance that the other person can grab onto and push against, you offer them something they cannot interact with at all. Think of someone who approaches a door expecting it to swing open and instead finds it completely solid and immovable. They push again. Nothing. They increase the force. The door does not budge. After a while, confusion gives way to frustration, not because of anything the door did, but simply because it refused to behave the way they expected. Strategic silence works in exactly this way. The other person pushes with a cutting remark, no movement from you. They push with public embarrassment. Still nothing. They try escalation, sarcasm, social pressure. Your calm remains completely unchanged. At first, this confuses them deeply. They expected resistance. They expected an exchange. Instead, they find something they have no mechanism for engaging. And the human brain, which depends so heavily on social feedback to navigate interactions, begins to struggle when that feedback simply does not arrive. So, the provocateur escalates. They go louder. They go sharper. But here is what escalation actually reveals. They are working harder than you are. The imbalance of effort becomes visible. One person is expending enormous emotional energy trying to manufacture a reaction. The other person is expending almost none at all. That contrast alone begins shifting how the situation is perceived. What makes this invisible wall so powerful is that it removes the reward that feeds the behavior. Provocateurs provoke because the reaction itself provides satisfaction. It gives them confirmation. It gives them the stimulation of knowing they successfully affected someone. Without that reward, the behavior loses its entire purpose. And a purposeless behavior, repeated over and over into silence, begins feeling hollow even to the person doing it. Some people eventually abandon the interaction entirely because the wall makes continued effort feel pointless. Others continue escalating, and in doing so expose themselves in ways they never intended. Either way, the direction of the interaction shifts quietly in your favor, not through aggression, not through argument, simply through the steady, composed refusal to engage. Drop this affirmation in the comments: "My calm is my shield." Most confrontations have a rhythm to them. Someone says something sharp, the other person reacts quickly. Words are exchanged, tension rises and eventually falls. The interaction closes. Even if it was uncomfortable, the brain logs it as finished and moves on. The key element in this rhythm is speed. A quick reaction produces a quick resolution, and quick resolutions give the mind permission to file the moment away and stop thinking about it. This is why many provocateurs depend on immediate reactions. They are not just looking for your emotional response, they are looking for closure, a completed loop, because a completed loop stops mattering. But silence does something that breaks this entire process open. When you refuse to respond, the loop never closes. The moment stays unfinished. And the human mind is genuinely tormented by unfinished moments. Psychologists have studied this extensively. Incomplete experiences carry a special kind of weight in human memory. The brain returns to them repeatedly, searching for meaning, searching for explanation, searching for some way to finally close the loop and file it away. The moment you deliver silence instead of a reaction, you activate this process inside the other person's mind. The provocateur suddenly finds themselves carrying an unanswered moment. They replay what they said. They run through possible interpretations of your silence. They question their assumptions. Did I read this situation wrong? Was my approach poorly chosen? What were they actually thinking? Am I missing something here? Each time the mind returns to the moment, it grows slightly heavier. What should have lasted only a few seconds is now occupying significant mental real estate. And here is the critical twist. You, having chosen not to react, are barely thinking about it at all. While they are caught in a loop that keeps pulling their attention back, your own mental energy remains completely intact. This is the delayed psychological weight that silence carries. Think of it as a gravity that builds slowly. The longer the silence persists without resolution, the stronger the pull on their attention. The brain keeps returning because it cannot rest until the experience is resolved. But your silence ensures that resolution never arrives. And as time passes, something interesting begins happening to the meaning of your silence inside their imagination. People naturally fill unexplained gaps with their own interpretations. Some will conclude that your silence means you found them irrelevant. Others will suspect it signals that you hold a stronger position than they originally calculated. Some will begin worrying that their behavior appeared unnecessary or foolish to those who observed it. Not a single one of these conclusions requires you to say or do anything. Your silence simply clears the space, and their own mind fills it with possibilities that unsettle them far more than anything you could have said directly. Uncertainty is one of the most psychologically uncomfortable states a human being can occupy. Clear outcomes, even negative ones, allow the mind to adjust and move forward. But unresolved situations create a tension that loops endlessly. Strategic silence uses that natural tendency as its engine. The interaction belongs to them in the moment. But over time, the weight of it becomes entirely theirs to carry. When someone chooses to provoke you, they typically believe they are being clever. The initial approach is usually subtle. The insult wears the mask of a joke. The criticism arrives wrapped in casual concern. The challenge is delivered with a smile. This ambiguity is not accidental. It is the foundation of the strategy. It protects them. If you react strongly, they slide behind the ambiguity and claim you misunderstood them. that you are too sensitive, that they were simply joking. The reaction becomes the story. Your emotional response becomes the spectacle, and the original provocation disappears into the background while everyone watches you instead. But your silence dismantles this protection entirely. When you do not react, the spotlight cannot shift. It stays exactly where it started, on them and on their behavior. There is no counter-reaction to watch. There is no argument to follow. There is only one person's behavior, unobstructed and visible. And here is what inevitably happens next. Because their strategy required your engagement and your engagement never arrived, they do not stop. They push again. They escalate. What began as a subtle, deniable comment becomes a sharper one. The tone drops its pretense. The sarcasm becomes less disguised. The intention begins to surface. Without you doing a single thing, the other person slowly walks their own mask off their face. Observers begin to notice the contrast. One person remains steady and composed. The other person grows visibly more invested in getting a rise out of someone who appears completely uninterested. The motive becomes transparent without you ever needing to name it. Their escalation does the work that no accusation from you ever could have done as cleanly or as credibly. This is the exposure that silence enables. The manipulator relies on their target's reaction to keep the manipulation invisible. Take away the reaction, and the manipulation has nowhere to hide. It stands alone, visible, and increasingly difficult to defend. Composure communicates without words. It says this person operates above the level of this kind of engagement. It signals discipline, inner stability, and a refusal to be drawn into unnecessary conflict. Over time, these qualities build a perception of strength that no argument could manufacture. Meanwhile, the provocateur's credibility quietly erodes, not because you attacked it, but because their own visible desperation for a reaction eroded it for them. Drop this affirmation in the comments. Truth makes itself visible. Real authority has a quality that most people never expect. It is quiet. The clearest indicator of genuine psychological authority is not the ability to dominate a conversation or win an argument. It is emotional immunity. The capacity to remain internally stable regardless of what external pressure is being applied. When people observe how someone behaves under challenge, they are not primarily evaluating the quality of their arguments. They are evaluating something much simpler and much more fundamental. Can this person be shaken? Can something from the outside reach in and move things around in their interior world? When the answer is yes, something shifts in how that person is perceived. It does not matter how articulate or intelligent they are. If a sideways comment produces visible irritation, if mild criticism triggers immediate defense, if sarcasm clearly lands and gets under the skin, observers register something important. This person's emotional state is accessible. It can be influenced from the outside. And once that vulnerability is perceived, it quietly diminishes authority. Emotional immunity creates the exact opposite impression. When someone attempts to disturb you and encounters only stillness, the moment becomes unusual. The expected emotional movement simply does not arrive. No heat in the voice, no visible tightening of the jaw, no rush of defensive words, just composed, unaffected presence. That stillness broadcasts something powerful without requiring a single word of explanation. It suggests that your emotional foundation sits somewhere beyond the reach of whatever was just thrown at it. And the human mind consistently interprets that kind of distance as a sign of genuine inner strength. Consider two people facing the same provocation. One responds immediately, their words coming faster and louder as the emotion rises. The other simply remains calm, speaking slowly or not at all. Even if their intelligence is identical, the observer's mind instinctively begins assigning greater authority to the second person. Because composure under pressure suggests self-command, and self-command is the foundation of every other form of command. There is a deeper effect as well. Emotional immunity disrupts the expectations of anyone who tries to provoke you. Once word spreads, consciously or unconsciously, that you are difficult to disturb, people around you begin adjusting their behavior. Some become more careful in their approach, others become quieter. The entire social environment around you begins to shift without you having to force it. This is the quiet power of inner stability. It does not need to assert itself loudly. It reveals itself through sustained restraint across repeated encounters. And that pattern of restraint becomes its own reputation over time. A reputation for emotional immunity is one of the most valuable social assets a person can build. Once established, it changes not just how people react to you, but how they approach you in the first place. Because people generally do not waste energy trying to rattle someone they believe cannot be rattled. At the very beginning of a provocation, everything appears to point in one direction. The provocateur holds the initiative. They spoke first. They introduced the tension. They established the emotional pressure. In their own mind, the interaction is already moving toward the outcome they planned. They are steering, and you are the one being steered. They are expecting something predictable. A reaction, a defense, a counterattack. Some visible sign that their move produced the intended result. But your silence does something to this picture that they never prepared for. It stops the forward momentum of the interaction completely. The direction they established suddenly has no destination. And as they wait for the reaction that never arrives, something quietly shifts. Instead of watching your emotional response, they begin waiting for it, then questioning why it has not come, then wondering what that absence actually means. Attention, which was supposed to flow toward you, begins flowing inward toward their own uncertainty instead. This is the reversal that silence creates. What began as the provocateur in control of the moment slowly transforms into the provocateur trying to recover from it. They may speak again to fill the silence. They may soften their tone. They may attempt to change the subject or make a joke to ease the tension they now feel building on their own side. All of these behaviors share the same quiet signal beneath them. They are trying to restore the balance that your silence has disrupted. The provocateur is no longer steering. They are stabilizing. And the difference between those two positions is enormous. In most social interactions, the person who appears to need the exchange most occupies the weaker position. When someone is visibly working to extract acknowledgement from another person, and that other person appears completely unmoved, the emotional math of the situation shifts clearly. One person needs something from this interaction. The other does not seem to need anything from it at all. Your silence creates a psychological space, and people inevitably move to fill it. But in filling it, they reveal the very thing they were trying to conceal. That they needed your reaction far more than you needed to give it. That their authority in this moment depended entirely on your cooperation. And without your cooperation, it simply cannot hold its shape. The interaction stops belonging to the person who started it. It begins belonging to the person who decides whether it even deserves acknowledgement. And that decision, made through stillness rather than words, is perhaps the most complete form of social authority that exists. You are not controlling through force. You are controlling through selection, choosing which moments receive your energy, choosing which words deserve your response, choosing which interactions earn your attention. Drop this in the comments right now. I control what I give my energy to. Most people spend their entire lives in reaction mode, reacting to what people say about them, reacting to small provocations, reacting to tests of patience, tests of ego, tests of emotional stability. And every single reaction, no matter how justified it feels in the moment, costs them the same thing: their attention, their composure, their psychological authority. Because attention is not simply a passive experience. Attention is power. Wherever your attention flows, your emotional energy follows. And wherever your emotional energy flows, Your sense of control begins to weaken. This is why genuine psychological strategy is not built on aggression or volume or verbal dominance. It is built on discipline. The discipline to recognize when someone is engineering a reaction from you. The discipline to remain grounded when the expected response would be anger. The discipline to stay composed and silent when every instinct is pushing you to speak. Silence is not the absence of strength. Silence is the demonstration of it. When you withhold your reaction, you remove the only reward that manipulators are actually seeking. You remove the confirmation that provocateurs depend on to know their strategy is working. You force the other person to stand alone inside the dynamic they constructed without a co-participant to give it meaning. And over time, that position becomes extremely uncomfortable for anyone whose sense of influence depends on controlling other people's emotions. Here is the truth that changes everything. Not every challenge deserves your words. Not every insult deserves your energy. Not every person who throws something at you deserves to know that it landed. Some situations only hold power while you are inside them. The moment you step back, the moment you refuse to enter the emotional structure someone else built, the power drains out of it entirely. The person who controls their own reactions holds the real authority in any interaction. Not the person who shouts the loudest, not the person who argues the longest. The person who remains so internally stable, so composed, so genuinely unaffected that others begin to realize something that quietly rearranges the entire dynamic. They cannot get to you. And when people realize they cannot reach your emotional core, they stop trying, they start adjusting, they start behaving differently in your presence. Not out of fear, but out of an instinctive recognition that you operate from a place they simply cannot touch. That is the real power of silence. And now you understand exactly why it works. If this shifted how you see social dynamics, hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Subscribe if you want to go deeper into the psychology of power, perception, and human behavior. We break down the invisible structures that govern social interactions, and every single week there is something here that will change how you see the world around you. Remember this the next time someone tries to pull a reaction out of you. The person who controls their response controls the interaction. The person who controls the interaction controls the outcome.